Many promising therapies still fail when moving from preclinical studies to clinical trials, especially in complex diseases like what we now call CKM.
And this is something we all keep seeing.
Hello, and thank you for joining this short scientific session. Today, I'd like to briefly talk about something very familiar, the translational gap in cardiovascular, kidney, metabolic disease. We've made a lot of progress in metabolic drug discovery, but translation is still difficult. And one obvious reason is the models we rely on. In real patients, metabolic dysfunction, kidney disease, and cardiovascular complications don't occur separately. They evolve together. But most experimental models still isolate these components. So we test drugs in simplified systems and expect them to work in much more complex biology. And that mismatch is difficult to bridge. So naturally, there's increasing interest in models that better reflect this complexity. One example is the SDT fatty rat. It develops obesity, type 2 diabetes, and hypertension without artificial induction. One of the earliest features is metabolic dysfunction. The SDT fatty rat develops obesity and type 2 diabetes very early, with blood glucose levels reaching around 600 milligrams per deciliter by 8 weeks of age. This early metabolic shift sets the stage for downstream complications. From there, renal changes emerge. You can observe early hyperfiltration, followed by albuminuria, inflammation, and fibrosis, and eventually a decline in renal function. And, depending on the study design, this progression can be captured within a relatively short time frame, for example, within around 10 weeks in accelerated settings. At the same time, cardiac changes consistent with HFpEF have also been observed in this model. For example, diastolic dysfunction, such as a reduced E/A ratio, can be detected. So you begin to see a cardiorenal connection on top of the metabolic background. So rather than looking at isolated endpoints, this model allows you to follow the interaction between metabolism, kidney, and cardiovascular systems within a single experimental framework. And importantly, this also opens the door to more integrated pharmacological evaluation. And importantly, this translates into pharmacology. Agents like SGLT2 inhibitors and GLP-1 receptor agonists show effects across multiple aspects of the model, including glycemic control, renal pathology, and even cardiac function. So rather than isolated endpoints, you start to see drug responses across the entire CKM axis in a way that is consistent with what we see clinically. So in summary, if we want to improve translation in CKM research, we likely need models that better reflect how these systems interact. The SDT fatty rat is one option that may be worth exploring, depending on your research context. Thank you very much for your attention.